Good evening, Henrik and Hans. Hans is sharing my screen. We are speaking about Ian McGilchrist tonight.
Yes.
This great poet and scientist who published a book in 2009, a revolutionary book, The Master and His Emissary. And the subtitle was How
And the making of the Western world.
Thank you, Hans.
And the interesting thing is, we are actually in the coming days here expecting his second book, and it's been widely spoken about. So this is in greatest anticipation. We want to do a little talk, chit chat about Ian McGilchrist and what we learned from his first book, The Master and His Emissary, just to have the ground, and then we're ready to read his next book. And let me just shortly sum the whole thing up. Divided brains have been studied since one began to part the corpus callosum, which is the connecting tissue between the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain. And this was in order to help combat epilepsy. Almost 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. And then one discovered that the hemispheres were not the same. For some reason, which is quite natural, we always assumed the hemispheres to be equal, but they were not at all equal. They seemed to have different capabilities, different properties, and even different wills. And what happened, of course, as always within science, you construct a theory, but you don't have much practice. And that was done by Sperry in the 70s. Another thing that always happens when you start out early is that the theory is not grounded. So there were so many faults in it, which is completely natural. It's inevitable. The first time you build a theory in a new field, it's going to be wrong. But because of that, all study of the left and the right hemisphere was ostracized, more or less. It's a non-touch subject. And Ian McGilchrist, who has a really odd background, started out as a literary student and not at all our ordinary neurologist. But the interest caught on, and he finally took an education as a psychiatrist. And he developed his interests in the differences between the right and the left hemispheres. And he spent in his preparatory work for the book 20 years. And there is in the book a reference to 2,500 disparate, different research information.
Over 2,000, wow.
Yeah, I think that's a world record. I never heard anything similar to that. And from all this research foundation came out a picture, and there was that picture he painted so well in the book, The Master and His Emissary. It's really well written. It's an intriguing read as well, because it has many twists and turns. For instance, the history party goes back to antiquity to see how the left hemisphere was at times combating with the right hemisphere, at times cooperating. And this combating, cooperating went on all the way into the 18th century. But something happened there and the left hemisphere took over completely.
Around the time of the French Revolution.
Yeah, you'd say that. Yeah. It's like a sensible guess somewhere in that vicinity. And that is referring to the title, of course, Master and His Emissary. And what is the normal hierarchy with the parts in the brain is that the right is in command, so to speak, is the first one. And the left is emissary. Emissary is meaning like loyal servant of a high degree. But it's not how it's working now. The left hemisphere has completely taken over. And that causes a lot of problems, as well as Ian McGilchrist points out. It's not the natural working order of things. The left hemisphere have a tendency to be self-concluding, self-deceited, and oddly enough, the left hemisphere doesn't have any access to reality whatsoever, which is like a sort of problematic thing. One good example of the left hemisphere's incapability to understand anything about reality or accept anything about reality is that if you had a stroke in the right hemisphere, and therefore you get a left arm paralyzed because the connection is wired crossroads, the patient will always deny the arm being paralyzed because the left hemisphere cannot acknowledge reality at all. And it's even so odd they would say anything. They say it was working a while ago, or even it's not my arm. And this you will hear from a person who's completely lucid, not nuts, not demented, not sick or anything. The left hemisphere doesn't acknowledge reality. It doesn't even have access to reality. It's not its job. Left hemisphere is more of a definer, of a representer, and its job is to specify something in reality to the level it's no longer real. And Ian McGilchrist has a wonderful picture of that. You can actually see it on the net. He had help with an advertising bureau. I forgot the name of them. But just look at Ian McGilchrist and bird example. I'll try to put a link with that picture up, and you see a bird. The bird also have this lateralization, which is called lateralization, meaning that the left and the right hemisphere have different working areas, different things they need to do. On the right hemisphere is keeping an eye literally on the environment for the bird, the surroundings, to see if there are any predators or what's around, how to get to the next place and all that. Whereas the left one, this is the representational factor. The left one take maybe a little inkling of reality and divert that, distort it in order to do an action. So the left hemisphere is action-oriented, distinctive, and the action with the bird could be for the bird to find a worm. So the worm cannot really be seen in reality. The indications is maybe at the equivalence of a pixel in an enormous computer screen. And that's not really part of reality as such. Anything can be seen. Everything can be constructed from that reality. And therefore, the special working function of the left hemisphere. And that is in great contrast to the right hemisphere, who has the wholeness, it has the body, proprioception, perception, kinesthesia, all the different concepts of balance, acceleration in the body, but also spatial and temporal thinking. That's on the right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere need to be engaged if those things are supposed to work in the most best, in the best way. In the perfect way.
But can we say that the left side is for the likes details?
Yeah, you could say that, but you need to remember it's not details of reality. It's not coming from reality as such. Because as I mentioned, just a pixel of an enormous computer screen, that is the world.
But the worm that the bird sees is a part of the reality.
No,
it's a fiction, so to say.
It's a fiction, yeah.
But it's still real in a one way.
Well, it's not, because anything can be represented from this computer screen. You have billions and billions of pixels, so you can choose any pic from that. So it originates from reality, that's true, but anything can originate from reality, and any representation. So it's not real in that way at all. But of course it has an origin, but anything has an origin in reality, because billions and billions of pixels. When you look around, you have an information field that covers maybe 1 billion times all the computers in the world. So any pic, well, in a way, speaking quantum physically, you have access to the whole universe. So the pic is free.
So now I have an insight. So to say, so the bird is flying, and we suppose we have a worm there, and it sees, instead of the worm, it sees only a lot of dots that makes up the body of the worm.
Well, he doesn't even see the whole worm. He just sees one little bit of the worm. And he doesn't really see it in the normal sense, because seeing is in the right hemisphere. This is a different type of thing altogether. It has nothing to do with perception. And it's really weird. And I think a better example is take a computer. We can actually do this with a computer. We can take a photo, it doesn't carry any information about the thing we're looking for. And we can use an algorithm and actually find that information. It's not contained in the photograph, but you can still do it.
But I got an idea. So if I were to say that the left side is like the classical physics and the right is like quantum physics, because one important principle of quantum physics is that there is non-locality. Non-locality is the right. So if you see the bird and sees the worm and doesn't see it.
I'd say
the bird's right brain cannot see the worm because of no locality principle, but the left, which is classical physics, in one way can see it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's an interesting way of looking at locality, and I think it rings true, actually. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. You see here, Ian McGilchrist, even if he's coming from neurology and semantical history, I don't know what to call it, but all those different fields that making up the new field that he wants to construct. It's very fruitful to make cross-references, and Khaled just did here. It's eerily accurate, actually, because localization is not of reality. Still useful, and it's very much connected to some sort of action. And quite similar as the Heideggerian 400 in a way as well. But that's even better than the localization.
But there is one principle to have in quantum physics, that is relationships. So in one sense, there is a kind of bizarre interrelationship between the bird and the worm, not in the,
But when we're being creative here, I'd say that the entanglement that the left hemisphere sees. And we have to remember we all in the left hemisphere mood. All of us who's listening now. Could be some exceptions in the population.
I'm thinking of what happens when we have some kind of trauma or we are very scared of something. We like need some kind of protection to deny reality in some way. Is that the left hemisphere assisting in that, or is that a decision made from the right brain anyway? I mean, things that you don't want to be reminded of, or traumatic experiences and stuff that needs deep psychological help or something. There is a natural tendency there to protect oneself from what happened or something.
I see your point, because the left hemisphere, its purpose is to block out things from reality. So we can see in computer, radio tomography, radio brain scans, and electroencephalograms, that the left hemisphere actively blocks out things. So it's a sort of a blockage function it has, which is very important.
But can it be like an order from the right brain to assist? Because the right brain has the context, right? And it sees that it could be.
Well, from the book, as far from the book, I see your point there, and from the book, it's blocking out reality because that is what the left hemisphere is supposed to do. There wouldn't be a representation without blocking out.
Yeah. Okay. So the functioning happens in the left, but could be in accordance with what the right hemisphere wants. The right hemisphere sees that we as an organism need to protect our body mind in this way, and orders the left brain to somehow protect from it.
It's a bit like this in the good working order. The right hemisphere always keeps the whole picture, so to speak, the holism, whereas it delegates, as you said, to the left hemisphere to do its job, so to speak. But what happened now with the dominance of the left hemisphere is the orders are no longer coming from the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is not directing the left hemisphere and saying, do your job, go ahead and do it. We have to remember to, and that's already in the title, The Master and His Emissary. The emissary is very, very, he doesn't take genuine orders like that. So it's more like they're cooperating. There's a symbiosis between the two. So there's not really orders coming. But if it's something very important, the right hemisphere always have a sort of veto. And one of the reasons for that is the right hemisphere. And take the example with the bird. The right hemisphere has the control of the environment. And that's the most important. It's more important than finding the seed or the worm. Because in the environment, you have your orientation, and above all for bird predators. So one can see from the outside direction that the right hemisphere needs to be number one, so to speak, because that's where you have the more dangers. Whereas the business of the left hemisphere is a bit more second priority. It's finding food, which is also important, but you won't die that day. You won't die within a week. But the right hemisphere has the environment. And as you say, if you're blocking out reality, it's the left hemisphere that does that. But the reasons, as you were indicating, it's nothing that McGilchrist goes into this traumatized person who doesn't take in reality anymore. Well, anyone who has trauma, I think everybody has some trauma, and we won't acknowledge that. And in that circumstance, obviously, it's a blockage, and the left hemisphere is doing the blockage. And I'm just going on a limb here and fantasizing, but I'd say an educated guess would be something called confabulation. Have you heard that, Henrik?
No.
This is quite interesting. Confabulation is the left hemisphere making things up. So, for instance, you asked me something, what happened the 3rd of October 2008 or something? And for some reason, I feel compelled to answer the question you put to me. And because I'm not a memory master, but I will, instead of hesitating, make something up. And this confabulation process is something we all have. And the story is usually very believable. And we noticed that when we tested, there's a lot of research testing witnesses and all that. Confabulation is much, much bigger than we think. And it's always triggered by some external impulse that you feel the need to answer a question. Good example can also be kids are quite good at confabulation. If they're not interested in answer, or the brain is, or the system is not interested in answer, you can't say it's the kid who's not interested. It's more like the whole of the kid is not interested. You will probably hear some confabulation of some sort. So it's not lying. It's not lying. You usually do not confabulate when it's something serious. If you really ask me, Henrik, have you ever stolen, Hans? Probably I won't confabulate that. Yes. If there is no need for lying, of course. But as you have traumatized patients, and this is interesting, they confabulate and they don't even know when they do it. So it sort of melts into the rest of the environment. And that's not to give a good answer to somebody outside. It's for themselves. They confabulate. So when they say they have a memory, they don't have a memory. They never said something else happened.
So confabulation is that a left hemisphere in action then, or is it the right hemisphere? Or?
I guess, because this is not a subject for McGilchrist, but I guess this is the left hemisphere, because that's its job doing those things. I think I mentioned that before. My own theory, how come people see distance when they look around in the world, and how can they see objects? Because there's neither distance nor objects, not like steady distances. And I think what happens is on some sort of confabulation. It's a blockage, and they say, I saw a distance, but there was no real perception of anything. And we know that is very, very common. So it's it wouldn't be it would be an educated guess to say it's confabulation of some sort. And you can actually be good at watching your confabulation, and I think it's a very good model for what the left hemisphere does. It's its purpose to do those things. And you say traumatized. I come to think of the Greeks. Is Heidegger who says that they are traumatized or were traumatized in some fashion?
Maybe the Greek philosophers like Plato and Socrates.
Yeah, definitely. They're all complaining of something. And McGilchrist is pointing this out. The complaints of the philosophers in the antiquity. They're not happy with reality. It doesn't seem real to them. And if you have a left hemisphere dominance, which is most probably that Plato and Aristotle reality won't feel real anymore. Even if you say it's real, it won't feel real. There usually some complaints coming, and especially when we had the turn of events in the 18th century, when the left took over completely, we had a whole wave of people from all strands of subject like music, authors like Shelley. They were all complaining. It's so boring. Everything's boring. And that's never been heard before. It's completely new. And that boredom, it sort of accelerates and progresses into melancholy in romanticism. And then at the end of the next century, the 19th century, you have what they call actually depression of some sort. Fin de siècle is depression. It's negativity, and it's connected to hopelessness and horrible things, really. So, and it makes us bored. And another feature with the left hemisphere, it is aggressive as well. The emotions are sort of spread through both of the hemispheres, but aggression is almost only in the left hemisphere, so it's the aggressive part. And McGilchrist makes a point that to say that the 19th century, no, the 20th century seen more wars than the 2,000 years before. More wars, more deaths in wars. And that has probably to do with the more aggressive side of the brain is the left, and it's dominant now. It's all very interesting.
And that's typical of the French Revolution. We think about them as very rational, and they were in many senses because they invented the centimeters, and all the measures.
Yeah, very good.
But very it's good. Not rational to kill thousands of people or the community.
No.
So something went wrong.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because even the left has do good things like inventing the meter and the liter and all that. It has a big problem seeing the big picture. So its conception of right and wrong is very, it's not broad enough. And of course, they said in the French Revolution, we want to have liberty, brotherhood, and equality. But the left hemisphere don't understand that these things need to be taken in a broader perspective. It takes time to develop brotherhood, equality, and liberty. And the left didn't see that. It can't see a bigger stretch of time, can't see anything progressing.
It sees only similarities, like centimeters and meters, everything is similar.
Everything is similar, and everything is now in a very, very typical way. So when you read the French Revolution, you get the sense these people, we want liberty and we want it now. We can't wait. And that is very much the left hemisphere. And we know that liberty as brotherhood, that is something that takes time and should take time as well. It should not happen in an instant, because that is not brotherhood anymore. You don't get things in an instant. Those things are always horrible things, but still they were wishing for it. And then when they didn't get it, this lack of patience that the left hemisphere has, they start killing people. First by the hundreds and then by the thousands. And I think it was like 30,000 again. Was it 50? I don't remember even. With, what was it called? Madame Guillotine, they called her. The rather crude angel of death.
But we should also give some hope to the listener.
Oh yeah.
That is, what should the listener do to develop the right side of the brain?
Yeah, it's I anticipating the coming book now because I got the feeling it's full of different methods to get over to the right hemisphere. But one good way is drawing. when we draw, we always draw reality. Well, at least if that's our intention. And that trains the right hemisphere. Every time you draw an exact copy of reality, you will make a sort of training for the right hemisphere. Whereas if you do a sloppy drawing, that's the left hemisphere, because the representation has nothing to do with reality. It's more of, well, it's really hard to find the right word for that, because I thought symbol in the beginning, but symbol is too exact, because a symbol you find when you drive into traffic, you find a stop signal, and it's very clear, it's very specific. Whereas the symbols of the left hemisphere are always sloppy. That could be called meanings. That's a more sloppy thing. That's a sort of meaning. It's not exact in that way. Whereas reality is distinct, it's different, it's always new. Time is always new, and space is always new. But for the left hemisphere, space looks all the same. Time is all the same. And therefore, there is no difference in time. And therefore, you can't have a progression in time. It's just a big now. So
would you say meditation could be of any use?
Yeah, I definitely think meditation could put you into just to calm down, because the left hemisphere has a tendency to be a bit stressed. It doesn't take input from reality, and then you have a sort of loop. Loops have a tendency. You're a computer engineer, and you know loops, they go quite quickly, don't they? Henrik?
What? Loops?
Loops.
Go quickly.
They go quickly, though.
Depends on the CPU power.
But they tend to be quicker than like something that takes in reality, which is a bit slower. So this loop, there's this weird feedback a left hemisphere does on itself is very quick, because it doesn't have to connect to reality, which takes time. So it's constantly saying it's the same, it's the same, it's the same.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that if the system doesn't get that immediate reward, which you don't get when you meditate, you don't get that immediate
belonging. Reward, and you slow things down and you take in reality. I think in some meditation techniques, you're supposed to observe your own body, and that takes time, and it's also specific, because reality is never the same. So it has this property of being different, giving knowledge, whereas the left hemisphere is not engaged in knowledge as such. It's just the same. Everything's the same. And I think that sort of stops the process of the left hemisphere. It makes it at least a bit, tires it out. Betty Edwards has a very good description. She has different techniques in her book, Drawing with the Right Side of the Brain. And they aim to bore the left hemisphere because it's dominant in our culture, and it won't easily give up its dominance. So what you do instead, you do a technique that takes a lot of precision. The left hemisphere doesn't like precision. It gets bored because precision is reality. So you're asked usually to do all the fine details in some beard. A beard, you are into the micro details. It doesn't even look like anything. It doesn't have any meaning for the left hemisphere. I think that's a good way of saying it. It doesn't have any meaning. The left hemisphere is looking for meaning. What's the meaning with this? What's the purpose? Where is the worm? Where is the seed? What's in it for me? And all that. And you won't find that when you do drawings. And then the left hemisphere get bored and it protests. And this is quite fascinating. She writes that we're doing research on this, and people start scratching themselves, they start sweating, they start feeling nausea. And that's the left hemisphere trying the best to force the person to stop the activity. And in the end, what happens? It gives up. And there's a sort of calmness coming over oneself, and you go into the drawing activity, sort of more like a flow situation. And you feel richness of reality. It's a more fulfilling thing. It's slower. And actually what you do, you see more colors and everything. When the left hemisphere gives up, you can see more colors. You can see you have a bigger tonality. You perceive colors, smells, you hear better, all those things that are usually blocked out. So yeah, it's a sort of meditation, yeah. But drawing is just the opposite. When drawing is done correctly, this specific drawing is just the opposite what the left hemisphere does. And it's fun. So Betty Edwards, she's a painting artist. She's she doesn't have any knowledge in these areas, but her guesses, most of the guesses are very accurate to what Nick Gilchrist wrote like 20 years later. So Betty Edwards just guesses. She has a little help from Sperry, the first one who was taking a good look into the left and right hemisphere differences. But her guesses are very good, very good answer. So some of them are not in concord with Ian McGilchrist, I should say. But most of them are the feeling, the general feeling. And I can really recommend that. Give it a try if you have some extra time, maybe a lazy summer, or why not the winter holidays that comes up now. Take a look at the book, Drawing by the Right Side of the Hemisphere, right side of the brain, and a pencil and a piece of paper. It's an investment, 150 crowns. It could be a fun doodle, and you get surprised. It's incredibly fun after a while. It's frustrating in the beginning. I know I'm very left hemisphere oriented, so this frustrates me as well. And I have these little drops of sweat coming out of my forehead, and I feel pain I've never felt before. And that is actually the left hemisphere trying to get yourself to move to some other activity that's more left hemisphere friendly, like watching the telly. Yeah, it is actually. I see when you watch television, the left hemisphere is activated 90% of the time.
Because the television screen is also a cost of pixels.
Yeah, and all this is very repetitive. It's always the same thing. You get the same experience again and again and again. So that sort of speaks to the left hemisphere.
Oh, begin with calligraphy.
Yeah, that's calligraphy is a very good thing. They're shown in countries that have extensive training in school years of calligraphy. The children are much calmer. They have difference is just incredible. Come to Japan when it comes to dyslexia and ADHD and concentration problems. It's much less. It calms the mind and it makes it possible for you to focus. And it's calligraphy or drawing is one of the main training for being able to observe your own mind. It's another skill that the left hemisphere doesn't have. Because it's always utåtriktad. How do you say that? Extrovert. It's always reacting to whatever is around it. It's just saying things directly, asking questions directly, because of what is due, but there is a time delay when it comes to the right hemisphere. Not very long, but it takes in reality and it does some sort of calculation on it, some sort of gathering, I'd say, thinking. Thinking could be the right word. I think that what Alexander would say, that the right hemisphere is the thinking brain, that's the thinking part, whereas the left hemisphere is just a loop. It doesn't do any actual thinking. It doesn't have awareness. I think that's very close to the point, actually. The left hemisphere doesn't seem to have any awareness. It's like an automata of some sort. It's automatic. It does its job, but it's not as aware. Whereas the right hemisphere has the whole picture. It takes in all aspects and the wholeness, and therefore has awareness and some sort of direction to the whole stuff. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Sorry, Eric?
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is fascinating stuff. It's definitely fascinating. And the book is extremely divergent. It's 800 pages and he stretches all over the place. So it's a whole lot to take in. It's not something that you read in like 6 month period. It takes years.
It opened my eyes to many things. For many years, I was at the university and I never understood why almost all university professors insist in this either or thinking. Oh, yeah. So this is correct, but that is not correct. No, yeah. I always try to be to insist with both. Often both options, especially when you analyze poetry. I brought my PhD thesis about poetry, and I argued for this both alternatives. That both alternatives are good. If the poet can, with one phrase, include 2-3 flattering things to say about his patron, himself, and so on, so that's really clever. But that's not how scholars work today. They want only one interpretation, and that's bizarre. And this Mackie-Chris gives a very good explanation why that's because it's the left hemisphere dominance among scholars.
Yeah.
And they see only these similarities, the focus on similarities. And this in this process, they should do more drawing or calligraphy, something like that to lift this.
I don't know much about poetry. I'm sort of a dumbhead when it comes to those things, not very sensitive. But I like language. But when I see some people who doesn't see double meanings in words or double meanings in a sentence, or when I do it myself, when you're stressed out, you usually go to the left hemisphere, and then you can't understand double meaning anymore. And the left hemisphere has a tendency to misunderstanding, which is quite interesting. From the beginning, Sperry, he put, this is what I said at the beginning, that the first theories were completely wrong, which they always are when you start a new subject. Should be. I think that would be ludicrous. But Sperry said language is in the left hemisphere. And those were one of those things that scientists discovered was wrong. And therefore, Sperry's theory was ostracized or criticized, and people couldn't touch it. But it's rather like the language thing is in the both halves of the brain. But if you cut out the right hemisphere, you don't have the depth in language understanding. So it seems that the left hemisphere is more of the executive part, that actually do the speaking with the speaking machinery, and some of the grammar and some of the semantics. Whereas to accurately understand language and accurately being able to say things, that takes participation with the right hemisphere. So it's, and that's what surprised the scientists in the beginning, because when you lose your ability to talk, if you have a stroke in the right hemisphere, for instance, you can't talk anymore. And they thought that all the good parts were in the left hemisphere. And on a superficial level, if you have a stroke in the right hemisphere, the person still can produce loads of language, and it's usually grammatically correct. And because of its semantical powers, it doesn't sound half bad, actually. You can do logic and all those things. Logic is actually very, left hemisphere is very good with some sort of simple logic that just takes contradictions, but an inclusive logic like para-consistent logic. I don't know, this is my guess, but I think it's very hard for the left hemisphere to handle that, because that has to do with wholeness. And as we all know from quantum physics, wholeness is always including massive contradictions. Massive contradictions. Reality is contradictions.
But just to get it right here, so the right hemisphere doesn't really perceive reality, right? It is like it holds the context and have the wholeness thing, but it uses the left hemisphere for perceiving the world. Is it right? Correct? Like seeing, hearing, listening, talking, interacting. Is that left hemisphere?
No, the left hemisphere is you see the reality, so-called reality, only as dots, points.
Yes, but it gets interpreted and directed to the right hemisphere to get the context.
Yes, if your
right?
If your right side is dominating, that's. But if it's not dominating, then it's still the left side who takes care of that, and that's dangerous.
Yes, yeah. I understand, but I mean, I just to get a grip of the functioning.
Yeah.
So
I think what you're pointing to is the language execution.
Yes.
That seemed to be a specific quality in the left hemisphere.
Okay, so seeing and hearing and touching is all the doing of the right hemisphere?
Yeah, you could say that. And I think that's actually a very good point. And it's just almost covered in McGilchrist. And that's most interesting because it's mention of other people indirectly. And this is this interesting aspect in the left hemisphere with the execution power of language. Because a stroke in the right hemisphere would make it completely impossible to produce any language whatsoever. That's understandable, or very, very smoothness, chancy language. And one of the things that we know now, there is could you say something? Proto-language going on maybe among animals, but they can't talk. None of the animals can talk. We are the only ones that can talk. And well, excluding parrots, but humans are talking the way we are. They're not talking grammatically correct.
So interpreting letters, interpreting symbols.
Yeah.
It's also a left thing, and when we see a symbol.
Yeah, order things. The left hemisphere is very good with ordering things, because order is a little bit different than the wholeness. And we're talking about specific order, like the order of mathematics, for instance, where you have cardinal order. And I would say, especially the cardinal order is something I get the feeling is typically left hemisphere. whereas ordinal ordering is more of the right hemisphere. You get my drift. The one is more like language, syntax, grammar, and the grammar function is also more situated in the left hemisphere than the right hemisphere. If you have some sort of lighter problem with the right hemisphere, you get problems with your grammar. And
yeah, so you can see, but the understanding and the meaning of the words or the symbols is done by the right side, the right hemisphere.
Yeah, this is fascinating. It seems that even if you can't talk, even if your grammar is defunct in some way, you can still understand language. Your thinking capabilities are still there, but you can't express. And this is very frustrating for a person who had maybe some left hemisphere stroke. They can't communicate. They can't express themselves. They know what they want to say. It's on the tip of the tongue. And you can imagine frustrating. Having one word on the tip of the tongue, that's frustrating. But having every other word on the tip of the tongue, you can imagine how frustrating that is. I actually had a friend, he suffered a left hemisphere stroke 3-4 years ago. And it's very easy to see him frustrated. His wife can interpret him now, but it's a cumbersome process. And she often gets it wrong. And he can show that she got it wrong, but not how she got it wrong. You understand? You get my drift? The how is very much the left hemisphere, but the varför, as we say in Swedish.
Why?
Yeah, the why. But the wholeness is it's more the right hemisphere. What you really intend, what you mean, the thinking, what we usually mean by thinking when thinking is good. And when thinking is sloppy, it's more left hemisphere. It's the automatic thinking. When you put the tea bag in the coffee cup and you get this disgusting beverage I got this morning, that's the automatic process. The left hemisphere is very good at automation, and it's robotic in a way. It's very mechanical. It goes like hand in glove with Newtonian physics, maybe. That's maybe it's a bit exaggerated, but something in that direction.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to be so interesting to find out what the new book is about.
Yes, and I think that we could conclude this with a hip hurrah for Mackelqvist.
Yeah,
that he knows that he has admirers in Sweden.
Yeah, we definitely admire him. I'd say he could be one of the really great geniuses. And it takes a great genius to say, as he said, in 10 years, I'm going to be forgotten. Because his only want is opening up this new area, this new subject. This is his gospel. He doesn't want to be right in this specific way. He just wants to open up this new avenue for knowledge. And I think that's the most intelligent thing of all to say that.
So let's put a dot there, not the left hand, left side.
An open dot.
An open dot of the right side, which is both options. And let's think in non-localities and with right hand, and let's let's exercise our right side with drawings and or calligraphy or something. And left, let us not be dominated by the left side of the brain. So, Henrik, and good night.
Yeah, good night, you too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bra, Mackelqvist.
Okay, see ya.